Toyota, a brief history. The early years. For all their success in the automobile industry, Toyota didn't start out by selling vehicles. At least the company that Toyota was a subsidiary of did not. Toyota's very first origins lie in the Japanese weaving industry when Sakichi Toyoda's company, that's Toyoda with a D, not a T, invented the world's first automatic loom and subsequently set up the Toyota Spinning and Weaving Company in 1918. His company's invention drastically reduced defects and increased yields since his loom stopped and would not go on producing imperfect fabric and using up thread after a problem occurred. This principle of designing equipment to stop automatically and called attention to problems immediately is called jidoka and remains crucial to the Toyota production system to this day. In the early 1930s, however, the Japanese government began urging Toyota to expand into the automobile production in order to supply the nation's ongoing war with China. Kiichiro Toyoda, the son of the company's founder, travelled to Europe and the USA to investigate the intricacies of automobile production. As a young entrepreneur, he saw a great future in building cars. Inspired by visits to modern motor factories in both the USA and Europe, he set off on his first steps of creating one of the world's top automobile manufacturers. His father, Sakichi, raised money selling the patents to his company's automatic loom design to a British firm, the Platt Brothers of Oldham. The loom impressed him so much that in 1929 they bought the production and sales rights for £100,000. This in today's money is the equivalent of £6.1 million adjusted for inflation. Sakichi gave those proceeds to his son Kiichiro to help develop the automobile technology at Toyota. And in 1934, the company produced its first Type A engine. 1 year later, Toyota was manufacturing its first vehicle, the Model AA passenger car, and in 1937, the Toyota, with a T, Motor Company was born. The explanation behind the change in just a single letter was the fact that in Japanese spelling of the word, the new name consisted of 8 strokes, a lucky number in Eastern culture. During the Second World War, the company was dedicated to production for the Imperial Japanese Army, and also with allocation of resources now being government controlled for the war economy, the building of passenger cars ceased as they were classed as a non-essential luxury good. The scope of what Toyota covered was quite wide, from military trucks for supply transport to amphibious vehicles to experimental helicopters to show proof of concept. None of Toyota's helicopters made it to frontline production, as only Germany and USA actually produced helicopters used during the war. But because of severe resource shortages in Japan, military trucks were kept as simple as possible. For example, the trucks had only one headlight in the centre of the front grille. The war ended shortly before a scheduled Allied bombing run on the Toyota factories in Aichi, which probably would have ended the company. With government permission to set up a vehicle manufacturing business, the start of today's global Toyota Corporation was underway. Post-World War II Japan experienced extreme economic difficulty. Commercial passenger car production eventually started in 1947 with the Model SA. But with huge economic fallout from the war still being an issue, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy by the end of 1949. But eventually, with investment from banks and a new focus on exploring opportunities outside Japan, Toyota reasoned that success could be achieved by building cars and trucks local to the markets where they were sold and used, a principle that still holds true today. In June 1950, the company produced only 300 trucks and was still on the verge of going out of business. The management announced layoffs and wage reductions, and in response, the union went on a strike that lasted 2 months. The strike was resolved by an agreement that included layoffs and pay reductions, but also the resignation of then president at the time, Kiichiro Toyoda, who later dies at the age of 57 in Japan on March 27th, 1952. Toyoda was succeeded by Taizo Ishida, who was the chief executive of the Toyota Automatic Loom Company. The first few months of the Korean War resulted in an order of over 5,000 vehicles from the US military under his belt, and the company was saved. Ishida was credited for his focus on investment in equipment. One example was the construction of the Motomachi plant in 1959, and production of the Toyota vehicles outside Japan began in 1959 in Brazil, which gave Toyota a decisive lead over what we know today as NISSAN, but was back then named DATSUN during the 1960s. When North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, Japan was still under American occupation. As the US and United Nations sprung to South Korea's assistance, Japanese manufacturers were commissioned to supply compact, four-wheel drive trucks to the US military. Toyota received huge purchase orders for these vehicles, as it had been one of the primary truck suppliers for Japan's own forces during the 1940s. Just 5 months after being given the go-ahead to start development, January 1951 saw Toyota present its prototype to the National Police Reserve. It was a parts bin special using the chassis of Toyota's 1-ton Type SB truck, with the oversized 3.4 litre Type B 6-cylinder petrol engine of the 4-ton truck, suspension from the Toyo Pet passenger car, and a rudimentary open body, similar to a Willys Jeep. Unfortunately, the NPR preferred Mitsubishi's licensed version of the Willys to the Toyota. Despite this, Toyota saw great potential in the prototype, resolving to continue its development and find customers on its own, especially as export restrictions had been lifted the year before. Advancements were swiftly applied to the Toyota Jeep BJ. The initials referred to the B series engine and Jeep, and the vehicle was tested by tackling technological feats that had only previously been possible on horseback, replicating a samurai warrior's legendary climb to the Shinto temple at top of Mount Atago. In driving up the old pilgrim route to the 6th station on top of Mount Fuji, the improved BJ was successful in both events, the reward for Toyota being to replace Mitsubishi as the official vehicle supplier to the NPR. In 1954, the hand-me-down Toyota Jeep BJ tag was replaced, as Willys had since trademarked the name Jeep. Toyota replaced this with the name Land Cruiser, and so the Land Cruiser was born. And that's it for part 1 of this video. If you liked the video, please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in part 2, which we're going to cover some of Toyota's rallying history, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.